I think we can start. Okay. During presentation, Filiz Hocam, can we unmute our microphones?
Sure.
Because we are going to start with Franziska.
Okay. Okay, then. Sorry?
The first presentation from Mexico, I think. It's true. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
You can start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the TMC committee and the organizers for the invitation. I'm very glad to present my PhD project here in this conference. Before I start, I would like just to talk about myself really quickly. My name is Franziska Barth, and I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Latin American Studies in Berlin, Germany. The institute belongs to the Free University in Germany, and my research interests are transnational migration processes, especially remigration and reintegration in Mexico so far. So before I start talking about my project, I just want to mention some aspects I would like to point out today. At first, I would like to explain the topic and my research questions, the theoretical frame and the methodology used. Afterwards, I would like to go into the empirical data of my study to explain and show a little bit. And at the end, last but not least, I would like to point out one thematic aspect which concerns reconfiguration processes. So to start this, what am I researching about? I'm actually interested in investigating how remigration and reintegration processes are working. Mainly, I'm observing Mexican migrants who have been working in the US in the non-documented way, and then they returned home to their home community, to their hometown, in this case, San Juan Texhuacan. And I would like to analyze how this return and reintegration process is like working and developing. So my main research questions here are: how are return and reintegration shaped and developed in the long term? How works the readaptation and the integration into family and society? Which are the relocalization strategies of the returnees? Which adaptation strategies develop returnees? Which role plays the stay and the experiences in the US in the return process? Just to mention the main questions. I have to add that my two main objectives the first one is the return as itself, as an individual and personal process, but also a complex and multi-layered one. I will explain this in my theoretical framing. And the second main objective is the place of origin, in my case, San Juan Texhuacan, analyzing it as a transnational social space. To point out my theory really briefly, I actually see return as part of the whole migration process. So I see return and reintegration as a complex process as well. And I really think analyzing the return has to be done in analyzing the immigration and the stay abroad and the remigration, because I think the topics are like collaborating. If, for example, someone stays in the US, I think that the experiences made there have to be considered while seeing how the people are reintegrating in hometowns again. So I think there's a collaboration there. So furthermore, I think if we have a look on integration studies, there are a lot of dimensions mentioned, often the structural, social, cultural, and emotional ones. And I think they have to be considered as well in order to draw a complex picture of a return. So I'm having a look on the motivations as well to migrate and for returning, the migration story, of course, and the experiences made abroad and at home. So just in order to explain really quickly that I really think it's a complex process here. How am I doing it? My PhD study is an empirical study. I'm following the ethnographic strategy here using anthropological and sociological methods. We call this triangulation of data and methods. I'm collecting my data in the Sierra de Sangolica in Mexico. And actually, I started in 2007, in which I did my first field trip to the Sierra. And then I followed 2008, 2009, and 2016. Actually, I was planning my last trip for this year. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it, but I'm planning it for next year. And actually, this empirical data allows me to really kind of complete a process, which I really would like to show in a way, not only having one interview on one time, but really having the opportunity, and I know it's very luckily, to really have a process shown of the returnees and their families. I'm using traditional methods like participant observation, interviews, etc. Right now, I have 90 interviews, which I have to analyze. I did the interviews in a semi-structured and narrative biographical and open way, depending. And I'm evaluating my data with a grounded theory through codification and close reading, I think known for GERDS. So where am I actually doing my research? You can see the map here. The Sierra de Sangolica is an indigenous mountain region in the east of Mexico in the state of Veracruz. And it's quite interesting because in the Sierra, which is still indigenous, there are two populations living, like the Indigenas and the Mestizos. Therefore, there are two languages, Spanish and Nahuatl, which is quite interesting in the process I'm observing as well. My main place of study is Texhuacan. You can see it here in the middle. Texhuacan is 2,000 meters above sea level, and there are 1,800 people living there. Here's just some impressions of the place. And how is migration transforming the Sierra or San Juan Texhuacan? In the 90s, the undocumented transnational migration started from the Sierra to the US, mainly for economic reasons, but the phenomenon was not new because there were internal migration and migration to the cities nearby as well, to Orizaba and Cordoba. But in the 90s, the transnational migration started. Mainly, we're talking about male migration, even though there are some women migrating nowadays as well. The migration movements, which are really frequent, are transforming the Sierra, of course, and the place I'm observing. And actually, I can call it a culture of migration. Every family has at least one family member in the United States or in Canada. And even the kids having like the wish to become a migrant in order to earn a lot of money. And we are talking about social pressure in a way as well, becoming a migrant, being a successful migrant, I have to add, is kind of a social pressure inside community, inside the society, which transforms the society very strongly. Because if you are not very successful, then you kind of like lose within society. So the frequent transnational processes I'm talking about have, of course, different impacts on different areas: economical, cultural, social, structural, and emotional ones. I think this quote from Lima fits quite well. The family's home village in Mexico has been a source of values and traditions, but the village has in turn also been significantly altered by the constant coming and going of its inhabitants to and from the United States. An ambiguous and hybrid culture and social space has emerged out of the social practices, symbol systems, and artifacts that span the lived places in the two countries. And so you just get an impression how it looks like these days in San Juan Texhuacan. You can see here a man. He's always dreaming of going to the US. His son is already a migrant in the United States, in New York, and he's doing like the gardening, dreaming of becoming a gardener in the United States one day. Migration is changing the village. You can see here quite well. Before there were the houses built out of wood. Now the people are really happy if they get the money through the remittances to build like the houses of concrete, and they are even getting higher, the houses. So, but this is like a prestige thing as well within the community. The people are being really proud of being a migrant. If you can see here, like the license plate in the windows, the pickups with the license plates, or the sound machines they buy from the money they earned in the United States. So there are a lot of things changing the community or like the society. Today I would like to focus on one point which I think is quite interesting for my study as well, talking about reconfiguration processes. Of course, migration has social-cultural impacts in families. Mostly men are migrating. This means that the women are left behind, and obviously they are changing the traditional family structures because we are talking about a patriarchal system here. So the women have to take over new tasks, duties, responsibilities, and challenges. There are a lot of more challenges for the family members left behind. So we're talking about negotiating roles if the migrants leave the families behind, but we are also talking about renegotiating of roles when the migrants come back. And I just want to give one example here of my empirical study. This is a typical case, Maria and Octavio. I met Maria in 2007, actually, the first time. Back then, her husband, Octavio, was in the United States working there. He was in the United States 2 times for almost 2 years in a non-documented way. And when I first met her, she was talking about how difficult it was to manage the kids, the money, and the household. So she was like really, having new tasks, new challenges, dealing with her life. When he came back in 2008, then of course they had to renegotiate their roles again. But in this case, it worked out quite well. He is accepting her new role within family and society because she's now attending the classes or the school classes, reunions, meetings of her kids at school. And in this case, it works quite well. There are some other cases where it doesn't work. So it's really individual, of course, in this way as well. So, this is just one insight of one empirical case I have here. 2016, I met the family the last time. So I really would like to complete the process by doing some more interviews in 2021. And as I mentioned, I have, I would like to focus on the individual return and remigration process within the family. So I'm doing the interviews as well with family members, like the woman of the migrants, to get a broader picture here. But also I'm having a look on the topics concerning family reunion again. And I think if we are talking about like reconfiguration processes due to transnational migration processes, then there's a change going on in the Sierra in any way. So because a part of family separations due to migration, the interesting, important developments and trends in the region. As I said, we are talking about a patriarchal system which is changing right now. there are some more women taking over roles and positions as well in the family, in the society, but also in the ritual sphere, which I think is quite interesting, talking about mayordomías, for example, in Mexico. So this means the topic of appropriation, negotiation of new spaces is quite interesting in my work as well. I still have to do a lot of more analyze here. But the change of traditional gender roles is part of the PhD as well. So a part of the individual process, I'm looking on topics more wider here. So this would be one of the topics I just wanted to briefly explain to you here. So thank you very much for your attention, and maybe some comments or question later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franziska, for this interesting presentation. There will be time at the end of the presentation for any questions you may have. Second presentation, I think I'm going to present. This is my presentation. Franziska, can you mute your, unmute. Last year, I was a visiting scholar at Regent University in London. There I conducted research regarding the tendency of return migration of the Turkish migrants in the UK. Today, I'm going to discuss the result of this research. Aim of the study. The main aim of the study I proposed was to find out the impact of religious, sectarian, ethnic, and socio-cultural belonging, as well as the demographic of the Turkish population living in the UK, in their decision to return to their country of origin. A further aim of this study was to investigate the motivation of those who first returned to Turkey and then migrated back into the UK for various reasons. Remigration. These are my research questions. Is there any relationship between migrants' gender, age distribution, occupation, level of income, and language proficiency and their tendency to return? Is there a relation between the various economic, political, marital, educational factors and migrants' move to London in the first place, as well as their later wish to return? Is there a difference between the first and second generation migrants in their approach to return? Does the social environment of migrants influence their decision to return? Do social exclusion, discrimination, or low and irregular income enforce the wish to return? Do they have any relatives who have returned? And lastly, what are the factors for the decision to remigrate for those who moved to Turkey and later returned to London? Now I would like to briefly go over the research design. The data found in this study is comprised of semi-structured interviews as one of the qualitative research methods, participant observation, and news sources that are published about the community from Turkey residing in London. A sample of 41 individuals was selected using simple random sampling, as well as snowball sampling method during a period between January and September 2019. And while selecting the sample, special attention was paid to obtaining a consistent distribution of class, sectarian, and ethnic positions, as well as age and gender. Those are my participants. Among 41 participants, 22 of them were females and 19 of them were males. 25 of them were married and 19 of them were single. 16 of them were high school graduates and 17 of them were university graduates, while 8 of them had education at a postgraduate level. As it can be seen, the participants of this research has a well-educated background, which means we can regard them as highly skilled migrants. And I divided my interviews in 4 different categories. The first one, participants who intends to go back to Turkey and has taken steps towards the purpose, such as investment, buying a new house, starting up a new business, etc. Second, participants sharing their lives between 2 countries. These participants should be no less than 3 months spent in each of the country, by the way. Third, participants who went back to Turkey but some reasons remigrate to UK. And the last one, participants who have already returned to Turkey. These interviews were conducted via Skype or on Facebook because I was in London during this research. Now I would like to give you a brief background information about the Turkish community in the UK. The migration from Turkey to the UK is highly irregular and mostly due to political reasons. In the 90s, migrants who were mostly of Kurdish and the Alevi communities took residence in the eastern and northern parts of London, whilst the textile industry was dominant. Due to migration taking place from cities such as Maraş, Sivas, Kayseri, and Malatya, London began to host a remarkable Turkish community. After the textile industry ended, these people with their accumulated capitals become self-employed. They open up their own particular small-scale businesses, such as off-license cafe shops and restaurants. Because of this economic activity, the migrant community have built a strong business network among themselves. These business relations have led the community to form an ethnic economy and thus actively organize around an informal economic practices. In recent years, it has seen that the number of people who have been applying for the Ankara Agreement visa has increased due to political and economical situation in Turkey. We can describe it as a second migration wave from Turkey to the UK. According to Home Office data from 2000 to 2019, more than 60,000 people applied for that visa. By the way, the estimated population of the Turkish migrants in the UK is around 300,000. Now, I would like to say something about return migration, and then I will discuss literature on return migration. In the migration literature, the return migration is increasingly triggering interest as a win-win scenario, both for the migrant and for their home country. Although the existing literature assumes that migrants contribute to their own country in many ways, my research suggests that return migration is way more of a complex issue. Many studies analyzing the reasons behind return migration draw attention to factors such as loneliness, alienation, homesickness, and discrimination, as well as factors such as education, work qualifications, language ability, and social connections as the main influencers. Return migration may be temporary, cyclic, or permanent, depending on the conditions and satisfaction derived at the host country. Return migration is directly related to migrant savings. Migrants take saved capitals back to their home country with an intention to open an enterprise by taking advantage of favorable wage gaps between 2 countries. Many studies show that migrants make significant money transfers, remittances upon return. In particular, it seems that migrants intending to return transfer more money. Another kind of political-based return migration is which occurs because of racial discrimination and xenophobia present in the host country. There are also gender-based studies of return migration, the impact of gender roles in decision-making, and the change in an individual's social status in the host country are the factors that these studies emphasize. Many academic studies reveal that the family plays an important role in the decisions to return. In these studies, it is stated that strongly family ties, close relatives, and friendships contribute towards a decision to return more than economic and political factors. There are many theoretical approaches regarding return migration in migration literature, as you know, but I don't have time to discuss all of them here. So I would like to move on my research results. Sorry. Now I would like to summarize my research results. The family factor and homeland longing were the most common reasons among those who have already migrated and who intend to return their home country. Most of the interviews state that they had returned or had the intention of returning because of their longing for their homeland and the relatives they had left behind. Another reason is related to social integration. At this point, factors such as linguistic proficiency, professional qualifications, positions in the labor market, and the social environment play a key role. Furthermore, failure to adapt to climate and culture of the host country are also reasons for their return. Especially in recent years, it has seen that the number of people who have been applying for anchor agreement visas increased. Among these migrants, the reasons for return decision are mainly due to employment, living difficulties related to this type of visa, and the problems of adapting to host countries' labor market. Additionally, many of anchor agreement visa holders could not benefit the government COVID-19 aid packet due to their special visa type. When we look at the relationship between age and return, it seems that the return intention is higher amongst migrants over 40 years of age. Therefore, I describe that as a middle-age crisis of migrants. Sense of loneliness and nostalgia are the main reasons in terms of return tendency for the first generation, particularly among the middle-aged migrants. When we look at the relationship between the return and the generations, while the first generation's tendency to return in mainly due to the loneliness, homesickness, and integration issues, the second generation is returning to Turkey for better career opportunities or to do investment. Migrants who retire in the host country mostly prefer to spend a few months a year in Turkey instead returning permanently. I think the main reason behind of that decision is they don't want to lose their benefits. In terms of remigration, the main reason for remigration can be economic difficulties, not being able to find a suitable job or create a viable business in Turkey as encourage migrants back to the UK. Another reason to remigrate is for a better education and future for their children. There have been a number of migrants who returned to the UK having failed to adapt to their home country's social and cultural environment. Political and economic uncertainty, security concerns, the other reason for remigration from Turkey to the UK. Regarding decision to return to their home country, no significant conclusion could be reached with regards to gender in my research. Lastly, it was found that there was situation there are all members of family reach a consensus. In some case, the inability to reach a mutual decision led to conflict and essentially a geographical separation of families between the UK and Turkey. So I'm going to conclusion. The first generation migrants, I mean pensioners especially, spend their time in Turkey for a couple of months. However, some of them stay as short as months since there is the fear of losing the social benefits in the UK. The pattern in the return migration for this so-called first generation tend to show similarities. According to this study, although most participants have the intention of returning to Turkey, they have no concrete plans to do so. Most of the migrants instead of definitely going back, prefer to spend a number of months a year in Turkey. This is due to the fact that transportation technology is advantage and cheap, and in addition, today's world is characterized by flexible working conditions, especially now after the COVID-19. In terms of return migration and remigration, this study reveals that family factor is one of the key reasons rather than ethnic and sectarian factors. Seeking for a new career is a major factor in the tendency of second generation migrants to the return. The second generation of migrants often work as an English teacher in Turkey due to their language proficiency. As for the gender perspective, we see that some women don't feel free and secure, thus do not intend to return Turkey. On the other hand, in the second generation of women who lives in the UK, the desire to await the pressure of family in London or in the UK is a reason to return to Turkey. According to the results of the interviews, the atmosphere of insecurity after the July 15 failed camp attempt has a significant impact on the migration and remigration decisions. At this point, the concerns about the future of their children for parents have been effective in their migration decision. Okay, this is the last slide.
So I'm
okay.
sharing.
I think the last speaker is Filiz. Now let's move on to the last speaker.
Sorry. So, can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you to my presentation and thank you very much for being here in the very last day of the conference. Today, I am going to talk about acculturation experiences of Syrian refugees in Turkey and their return intentions. Before starting, I would like to present myself first. I work as an assistant professor in İzmir Katip Çelebi University, but I also did my PhD in Tilburg University on return migration of Turks from Western Europe. So it is a pleasure to be in this session, especially that it is very relevant to my PhD as well. Although today I am not going to talk about really return migration. And so if you see the title page of my presentation, I would like to start with giving some explanations about the illustration that you see here. This illustration belongs to a close friend of mine. She was a very big fan of Istanbul and she resisted moving out of Istanbul with the husband because she had to work in decent jobs but in several cities in Turkey, and she resisted for a long time, but after that he had to move to Vienna, Austria, and then at the end she gave up and she went to Austria with the husband and she designed this illustration, and actually it represents the social psychological processes of a person who has to move, and it is a voluntary migration. And if we think about forced migration, I think it gives some clues about the psychology of a person who has to leave the hometown And the name of the illustration is My Town. And you see that here that like the person even wants to bring the clouds of the city with himself or herself. So I think it's a good symbol of the social psychological processes that we go through in migration context. And I would like to give some background to my study. As we all know that like in 10 years, more than 6 million people had to leave Syria due to the civil war there. And the majority of Syrians are residing in Turkey and also in neighboring countries like Lebanon and other countries, and some of them are in the European countries. However, if you compare the numbers of Syrians living in Turkey and Europe, they are really different. For example, like in the Netherlands, there were only 30,000 Syrians at the moment. However, the number of university students, Syrian university students in Turkey is 30,000. Therefore, we are really talking about a huge number of people in Turkey. And Syrian refugees are categorized as immigrants or guests in Turkey. Actually, this categorization was first pronounced by the president, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan, and it symbolizes two things. One is that they are not given a legal refugee status in Turkey, and also the other one is that we are perceiving them as temporary. However, it is already 10 years, and we see that almost half of the refugees are within the ages of 1 to 18, under the age of 18, which means that they are children. So almost 2 million Syrian children are residing in Turkey. If you look at the whole population of refugees children in the world, it is 7 million. Therefore, we see that like almost 2 million of the whole refugee children in the world are in Turkey. Therefore, we are really responsible for integration of these people here, even if we see them as temporary or guests. So we come across a very difficult issue here. When people move to a different country, Syrians or Turks, or like when we enter a completely different society, we go through an acculturation process. Acculturation is defined as like the change that happens in both of the cultures when two people come to contact in a context. So we can basically define it a cultural change occurring in two groups, both in minority and in majority, due to the contact. And as you can imagine, like the change is bigger in the minority groups. However, there are many factors affecting the acculturation processes. For example, if the migration is voluntary or forced, or is it perceived temporary or permanent, and characteristics of the groups. Like, for example, if the host society adopting a segregationist policy or assimilationist policy, so we really know if we, for example, encounter discrimination or prejudice in the country that we go, it also influences. And also like the social distance that we perceive. For example, Turks migrating to Europe is rather different from the Syrians migrating to Turkey because both groups are religious and they share the same kind of food and etc. And also characteristics of the individuals like attitude, motivations, norms, values, the personality types. Actually, I will basically focus on today a little bit individual differences because we see that although many people migrate to other countries in difficult conditions, some of them adapt very easily, more smoothly. However, some of them have more difficulties. So when we look at the differences, like we come across with a concept which called psychological resilience, and which has become very popular in the recent years. And psychological resilience means that like bouncing back after having a difficulty in our lives. But in the past, psychological resilience was taught as a personality trait, like being extroverted or introverted. However, now we are seeing psychological resilience in a more different way. For example, if a person uses how to use the resources around him, for example, if there's a child who has a good role model, and if get benefits from the role model, and if he wants to learn the language, and if he's provided institutional support, if he can use it, then we call it now he is more psychologically resilient, and also social support that he's receiving, and the motivation of the person, of course. So both individual level factors and group level factors influence our acculturation process. And in my study, I am using the theoretical framework of Berry. It is very popular, maybe also widely used, you know it. It basically says that when a person goes to an entire new community, he asks basically two questions. One is, how important is it to maintain my own culture? And the second question is, how important is it to adapt to the new culture? So depending on the answers given to these two questions, the people choose one of the four strategies. For example, if the person finds important to adapt to the new culture and interact with the new community, learn the language of them, and also maintain his own her own culture, for example, teach children the language, and also like doesn't cut the connection with the background, therefore the person chooses integration strategy. However, for example, in my research, there was a old man who said that, okay, I lived in the Netherlands for 40 years and I didn't say hello to a person. And then also I didn't drink one cup of tea with a Dutch person. Then basically the person chooses the separation strategy. If the person rejects both cultures, it is marginalization. And for example, if the person doesn't want to talk to any Turkish in the migrated context and only wants to socialize with the native community, it is assimilation. Depending on the strategies that the person is choosing, the stress level changes. So it is a stress coping framework, actually. So it is basically used in psychology, and it explains that one of the four strategies determines the psychological situation of the person. However, we have to think here in the background, if we really talk about the preference of the migrant here. For example, if the person has a choice, for example, to speak his or her language in the school or in the public places. And also in cross-cultural research, adaptation to a new community has two distinctions. For example, we call it like psychological adaptation and sociological adaptation. Psychological adaptation is how happy you are in the new culture. How well do you feel in the new culture? And it's basically refers to your mental health, well-being, and do you really feel good in the new culture? And sociocultural adaptation is if you are really finding your way in the new culture, like if you can function in the new culture. For example, if you live in Turkey, do you have the card to get on the bus? Or do you know how to fill it in the card? Or do you know where to eat kebab and which shop serves the best kebab, for example? So if you can really find your way in the new culture, it is sociocultural adaptation. So we need to know the distinction here. And if when we come to my study, actually, we aim to understand the acculturation experiences of Syrian refugees and what are the factors affecting sociocultural and psychological adaptation of these refugees, what makes it more smoother and what makes it more difficult. Usually, most research focus on the difficulties experienced, but today I am mostly more interested in the factors promoting psychological and sociocultural adaptation of refugees. And also, I would like to shed light on the associations between sociocultural adaptation, psychological adaptation, social support, and psychological resilience. Therefore, I have two main research questions. One is that what are the associations between psychological resilience, social support, sociocultural adaptation, and psychological well-being of Syrians? We know that from the literature, psychological resilience and social support directly affecting mental health of people, migrants in the world. And also, is there any relationship between acculturation outcomes of refugees and their return intentions? And actually, I am a qualitative researcher, but in this study, I conducted quantitative research, and quantitative data is collected through surveys, and they are hard copies, not online. And actually, it was really difficult to reach Syrians and to convince them due to the socio-political reasons as well, because the questions were a little bit some can perceive that as a threat to their status in Turkey. And participants composed of 154 Syrian adults, the average age is around 30. And it took approximately 25 minutes to complete the survey, and we collected the data between February 2018 and October 2018. If we look at the demographic characteristics of the participants, like most of them were male, but it is really understandable because like in also other researchers in the mainstream research, you can even reach 1/3 or less females. And females are hardly represented in the research because it is more difficult to reach Syrian refugee women in Turkey. They are more reluctant to participate in the studies and they are mostly at home. And also, if we look at the educational levels, like most of them are graduated from like high school or less than high school. A big majority of them were less educated. It also represents the profile of Syrian refugees in Turkey as well. And most participants were married, as you can see in the table. And also, again, majority had full-time job or part-time job in Turkey. The instruments I used were like to test psychological well-being. We used satisfaction with life scale, then multidimensional scale of perceived social support, resilience scale. As I just told you, in this scale, psychological resilience is perceived rather differently from the previous research. As I just said, it is not a personality trait anymore. It is mostly defined as the ability of a person to be able to use the resources in the immediate environment. Like, for example, if the person has a significant other that he can go when he has a problem, for example, or if they can reach the family members, or if there is a good teacher or professor at the university that can support him. And the return intention of refugees are measured by two questions. How likely is it that you would leave Turkey in the next 10 years? And how likely is it you would live in Turkey permanently? And also our informants provided information on their age, gender, education, occupation, marital status, how old were they when they migrated, how long have they been living in Turkey, the duration, and also they provided information on their language proficiency. And if we look at our results, first of all, we checked the correlational relationship between our dependent variables, and as you can see in the table, all of our variables were highly significantly positively correlated with each other. Therefore, we can see that sociocultural adaptation and psychological adaptation were correlated with resilience and social support. And also we checked the correlations between demographics and also our dependent variables. And within the demographics, the only variable that was related to sociocultural and psychological adaptation was speaking level of the refugees, and also it makes sense and it is consistent with the data provided in the literature before. So if the people speak better Turkish, they are better adapted both psychologically and also socioculturally. And then we conducted some regression analysis to see the association, and the analysis showed that there are positive associations between psychological well-being, social support, psychological resilience, and sociocultural adaptation. And when we put all the variables in a model, psychological resilience and sociocultural adaptations were found to predict psychological well-being of the refugees. After finding these results, we tested a model. And as you can see in the model, social support leads to better resilience. And the resilience both predicts sociocultural adaptation and satisfaction with life, which means that psychological adaptation. And you can see that both psychological resilience and sociocultural adaptation lead to psychological adaptation. It is also consistent with the data in the literature that we see that people who are feeling better, or people who do not have any mental disorders in the migrated context, mostly are the people who are socioculturally better adapted to the society. And when we look at the results about return intention of the refugees, and we can see that it varied in accordance with the psychological well-being and sociocultural adaptation of the refugees, which means that Syrian refugees who are better adapted both psychologically and socioculturally had less intention to return. However, I have to make a distinction here because adaptation levels of participants were differed between who said to the question, how likely is it that you will live in Turkey permanently? If the person said very likely, it means that they are better adapted. If they are not adapted socioculturally and psychologically, they said that it is not likely that I will live in Turkey permanently. It means that they don't have an intention to live in Turkey. However, there was no variation with respect to answers to the question, how likely is it that you will return to Syria? So, one of the reasons for that can be that they don't see any Syria or they don't have hopes about Syria, that they will not finding their home back at home. Therefore, it is about the situation of Syria, I believe. So we can infer from here that they have more intention to live in Turkey rather than to return to Syria. And maybe we could have asked another question like whether do they want to move to another European country or etc. And it is very important that there was no variation regarding the demographic information. Therefore, we see here that depending on any demographic information, the return intention or intention to live in Turkey do not change. However, what makes the difference is sociocultural and psychological adaptation. And in the discussion part, I would like to state here that like available resources in the immediate environment of the refugees, like social support, resilience, promote both psychological adaptation and sociocultural adaptation of refugees. And both psychological adaptation and sociocultural adaptation predict return intention or intention to live in Turkey. And we can see here that it has important implication for the role of psychological support programs in Turkey. And we need really good intervention programs in Turkey to support Syrians or other minority groups in Turkey. And we know that in the world there are examples of psychosocial support to minorities. Therefore, we should also have this kind of support for this vulnerable minority. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Hocam, for this very important and fresh presentation.
Thank you.
Now, question and comment time. If you have a question, please hands up. Where can I see? Sorry. Vildan Hocam.
Hello again. I want to ask a question to you, Tuncay.
To me?
Yes, to you.
Yeah.
You mentioned about family pressure when you make an interview.
Yeah, from the gender perspective, yes.
Yes, from the gender perspective. I want to know that do they mention it directly or you understand it from some clues?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of second generation, some interviews mentioned that they turn back to Turkey because of their family pressure on them. You know, in London, mainly there are Alevi communities, but somehow they are conservative as well. They want to get married their daughters early age. Some of them don't accept this. That's why they wanted to turn back Turkey. Vildan Hocam, is okay?
Thank you. Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
We have 30 minutes more. If you have any question, you can ask, or any comments. Filiz Hocam. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I would like to ask a question to Franziska. Franziska, do I pronounce it correct? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I learn, like, in what process are you in your research? So it is like a longitudinal research, I think.
Yes.
So it takes more than 10 years, so it is very valuable. So I was really curious about, have you finished it or have you published it? So could you please give some more information about it?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. No, I'm still in the process. I'm still like analyzing all the empirical data. So I'm not really having like results to show nowadays. I'm really thinking if like I still need 1 year, 1.5 years to finish like the PhD, hopefully. I was planning doing the last trip now this year, 2020, to really conclude that like from 2007 to 2020, like the period, which I think is quite interesting to really see the process, because I was able to really interview the same people again. So yeah, but there's still a lot to go to do to analyze. Yeah, but it's still not published. No, it's in the beginning of the analyze process, and then yeah. But thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So it is very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any question? So in this case, I would like to thank you again, our speakers, for their very interesting presentations. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.